So you've spoken to this a bit, but why is mental illness so high among people who experience homelessness?
Yeah, so that's kind of a complex question, and it has a few parts to it. Um, some people seeing this will be familiar with what are called the social determinants of health. So that means, you know, really what determines our health, above and beyond, genes that might cause hereditary illnesses or things that come along through environmental exposures, that kind of thing, is it's the social determinants of health are really what drive our health outcomes to a really large extent. Mental health, physical health across the board. So that means things like having adequate shelter, adequate food, decent relationships, access to employment, access to meaningful activities, being able to get around to get what you need in the world, being empowered and feeling like you have the resources that you need to keep safe, to look after your wellness, to look after the wellness of those around us. So those are kind of social determinants. So for people that have experienced homelessness, and I'm generalizing here too. One thing I should have gotten out of the way at the beginning is that there's an incredible range of experiences and trajectories for people that might fall under this category of I've experienced homelessness, and a range both in terms of individual experiences, context, reactions, the works. But with setting that aside, is in terms of mental health challenges, for a lot of people who experience homelessness, the challenges didn't start when they were outdoors or had lost stable housing. It often began before. Sometimes it began in the form of childhood experiences of neglect and violence in various forms. Not always, and there can be an assumption that this is always about parents. For some it is, even for many it is, but this can be in the schools as being bullied in the schools, excluded, having a learning challenge that wasn't picked up in time, and being increasingly kind of shoved out of opportunities. And all the mental health onset of mental health and addiction challenges in childhood and adolescence, these sorts of things can lead in. And then it transfers into when the person begins experiencing homelessness at all compounds. And it's not just young people. I work with youth a lot, but of course, there are folks who had lives where they were, working full time, married, maybe had kids, all of that. And whether it's an addiction that challenge that arose, or poverty, maybe there was a divorce and a job loss, and all kinds of things can happen, that can lead a person to just suddenly not be able to afford a place to live. And all of those challenges then just amplify in street environments, as you might imagine. The stressors amplify, the exposure to violence increases, hopelessness, all kinds of other challenges come up, and suddenly I've mentioned discrimination and stigma. That it's intense for many people. And so when a person might already be struggling with a depression, and or addiction challenges in their homeless environment, suddenly they've lost some forms of identity that had value to them and had some worth, some quote unquote worth in our societies. I am employed, or I am somebody's husband or wife, or whatever the identities are. I have a home, I have a car, all these things. Suddenly those are taken away. And then there are assumptions about a person being dangerous, being a criminal, being lazy. I mean, there are all these labels that get applied, and this all compounds mental health challenges, creates new mental health challenges. And it's I know there's a term that's used that I think is reasonably accurate, called the vicious cycle. It's sort of the idea that the further a person gets away from the supports and social determinants of health that we need, it's like an exponential challenge where things get worse and worse, and it gets harder and harder to intervene. This is why it's so important, to come to that prevention discussion, because the earlier on you can intervene to help a person with their mental health challenge, to help them sustain their housing if it's at risk, to help them keep the job, to help them in all of these different areas. It's so much easier to address it in earlier stages than when a person has lost all of these things. The mental health challenges have increased. It's so much harder to come back from that.